Ethan Caldwell, a highly successful CEO, built his company into a powerhouse of innovation and success. But beneath the polished surface, something feels off. Employees seem disengaged, whispers of discontent linger, and the numbers don't tell the full story. Determined to uncover the truth, Ethan makes a bold move. He goes undercover as a janitor. What starts as a simple observation quickly spirals into a shocking discovery. The culture he thought he built is far from reality, and the people who keep his company running are overworked, ignored, and unheard. Why did Ethan's undercover journey lead to such dramatic outcomes? What hidden truths will he uncover? And can he turn everything around before it's too late? Stay tuned to find out. And before we jump in, let us know where you're watching from. If this story of leadership, redemption, and change resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Ethan Caldwell stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his executive office, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out over the San Francisco skyline. The city stretched out before him, a testament to ambition and progress, qualities that had defined his career. At 45, Ethan had reached what many considered the pinnacle of success. As the CEO of Apex Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing artificial intelligence companies in the country, he had built an empire from the ground up. Investors admired him, the media praised him, and the business world envied him. And yet, he couldn't shake the nagging unease that had been growing inside him for months. The company had just closed another record-breaking quarter. Profits were soaring, and Apex Dynamics was expanding into new markets at an unprecedented rate. By all external measures, everything was perfect. But something wasn't right. Ethan had always prided himself on fostering an innovative and supportive company culture, yet the latest employee satisfaction surveys told a different story. The results had been waiting for him when he arrived that morning. He had spent the last hour combing through them, his frown deepening with every page. Numbers didn't lie, and what he saw was troubling. Employee satisfaction had plummeted 15% from the previous year. Trust in management was alarmingly low. Complaints about burnout, favoritism, and a toxic work environment were recurring themes in the open-ended responses. Ethan exhaled slowly, pushing away from the window as his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Caldwell, Olivia Jong and Damian Carter are here for your 10 o'clock. Send them in, Sarah." A moment later, the door opened, and Olivia, Apex Dynamics head of human resources, entered first, followed closely by Damian, his chief operating officer. Both wore expressions that mirrored the pit in Ethan's stomach. "Thanks for coming," Ethan said, gesturing toward the sleek conference table. "I think we all know why we're here." Damian, usually upbeat and composed, looked unusually tense as he took his seat. "The survey results?" "Exactly." Ethan settled at the head of the table, resting his elbows on the polished surface. "Olivia, can you walk us through the highlights, or should I say lowlight?" Olivia sighed, unlocking her tablet and swiping through the report. "It's not great news. Overall satisfaction is down significantly. The most concerning drops are in work-life balance, feeling valued, and trust in leadership." Ethan leaned forward. "And the open-ended responses?" Olivia hesitated, glancing at Damian before continuing. "There were a lot of comments about a cutthroat culture, people feeling overworked and underappreciated. Many employees mentioned a lack of transparency in promotions, favoritism in assignments, and a growing sense that leadership is out of touch with what's happening on the ground." Damian rubbed his temples. "Look, we've had an incredibly aggressive growth year. Expanding at this pace is bound to cause some strain. Growing pains are normal, Ethan." Ethan held up a hand. "I hear you, Damian. But we can't just dismiss this as growing pains. If our people are struggling, that's a problem we need to fix." Olivia nodded. "We could implement some new team-building initiatives. Maybe re-evaluate our benefits package." "No," Ethan interrupted, shaking his head. "This goes deeper than that. I don't think this is about perks or off-site retreats. Something is fundamentally off in our company culture." He stood and began pacing, hands on his hips as he turned the problem over in his mind. Reports and surveys only told him so much. He needed to see it for himself. "We track so many metrics," Ethan said, stopping near the window. "Performance, efficiency, output. But what if we're missing the real story?" Damian and Olivia exchanged glances. "What are you thinking?" Olivia asked cautiously. Ethan turned to face them, his jaw set. I need to see Apex dynamics from the inside. No filters. No corporate presentations. I need to know what it's really like to work here when people think the boss isn't watching. Damien's brow furrowed. Ethan, what exactly are you suggesting? Ethan took a deep breath, the idea fully forming in his mind as he spoke the words out loud for the first time. I'm going undercover as a janitor. Silence filled the room. Then Damien let out a sharp laugh. Okay, you had me there for a second. He shook his head. Come on, Ethan, you can't be serious. Ethan remained unfazed. I am serious. Olivia's eyes widened. You're the CEO of $1 billion company. You can't just mop floors for a week. Why not? Ethan countered. We outsource our janitorial staff through an agency. It wouldn't be hard for me to get placed as a new hire under a different name. Damien leaned forward. Let's say you pull this off. What do you expect to accomplish? You think 1 week as a janitor is going to tell you everything? I think it's going to tell me more than sitting in this office ever will. For the next hour, the three of them hashed out the details. Olivia was hesitant but eventually agreed to help set it up. She would arrange for a fake identity, Eli Dawson, and ensure Ethan was placed as a new janitor under Apex Dynamics contract. A professional makeup artist would help alter his appearance, and he would start growing out a short beard immediately. What about your wife? Olivia asked. Lisa's going to wonder why you're suddenly disappearing for a week. Ethan's expression softened. I'll tell her the truth. She'll understand. As the meeting wrapped up, Ethan could feel the weight of Olivia and Damien's apprehension. I know this is unorthodox, he admitted. But I need you both to trust me on this. If something's broken in our culture, I need to see it firsthand before we can fix it. Damien sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. This is insane, but okay. Just be careful out there. With the plan set in motion, the next week was a whirlwind of preparation. Ethan met with a stylist to perfect his disguise, practiced walking and talking differently, and memorized his new backstory. The night before his first shift, he stood in his bathroom, staring at the man in the mirror. Gone was the polished CEO in a tailored suit. In his place stood Eli Dawson, a middle-aged man in a worn uniform and scuffed work boots. Lisa appeared behind him in the doorway, arms crossed. I still think you're out of your mind for doing this. Ethan met her gaze in the mirror. Maybe I am. But I need to do this, for the company, for our employees, and for myself. She sighed, wrapping her arms around him from behind. Just be careful. And don't forget to eat the lunch I packed you. Ethan chuckled. Yes, dear. As he lay in bed that night, sleep eluded him. His mind raced with possibilities. What would he discover? How would people treat him? Would this crazy plan actually work? By dawn, he was up, dressed, and ready. He left a note for Lisa, grabbed his backpack, and headed out the door. As he pulled into the Apex Dynamics parking lot, he parked far from his usual reserved space. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car. This was it. No turning back now. Ethan Caldwell stood in front of the full-length mirror in his home office, barely recognizing the man staring back at him. The transformation was striking. His usual clean-shaven, polished appearance had been replaced by a slightly unkempt beard, thick-rimmed glasses, and a different hairstyle that made him look several years older. Instead of a designer suit, he wore a faded blue janitor's uniform with a name tag reading Eli Dawson. His wife, Lisa, stood nearby, arms crossed as she assessed the final touches. You look like a man who spent the last 10 years fixing broken sinks, she mused. Good, Ethan said, adjusting the glasses. That's the goal. Lisa sighed. I still can't believe you're doing this. You said that last night, he reminded her. And I'll say it again until it stops sounding crazy, which, for the record, it hasn't. Ethan turned to her, his expression serious. Lisa, if I don't do this, I'll never really know what's happening inside my company. Reports only tell me so much. I need to see it with my own eyes. Lisa exhaled, finally stepping closer and smoothing the collar of his uniform. I get it. I just don't want you to get hurt. Not physically, she added before he could argue, but emotionally. What if what you find out changes how you feel about everything you've built? Ethan placed his hands on her shoulders. Then at least I'll know the truth. And if something's broken, I'll fix it. She studied him for a long moment before finally relenting. All right? But you better call me if anything goes wrong. Promise. With that, Ethan grabbed his worn-out backpack, one that Olivia had picked up for him at a thrift store, and walked out the door, ready to begin the most unorthodox experiment of his career. The drive to Apex Dynamics felt surreal. He had made this trip thousands of times, but today was different. He wasn't Ethan Caldwell, billionaire CEO, parking in his reserved executive spot. He was Eli Dawson, an anonymous janitor arriving for his first day on the job. He pulled into the far end of the employee lot, where the lower-tier workers parked. Already, the experience felt different. Instead of stepping out to a quiet executive entrance, he joined the steady flow of employees making their way to the main building. No one spared him a second glance. Reaching the entrance, he spotted the security desk. Normally, he would have breezed through with a nod to the guards who knew him by name. Today, he approached hesitantly, gripping the temporary ID badge Olivia had arranged for him. The security guard, a stocky man in his 50s with a copper-stained uniform, barely looked up from his computer. ID badge? Ethan handed it over. The guard gave the badge a quick glance before waving him through. Janitorial office is in the basement. Take the elevator on the left. No formal welcome. No acknowledgement. Just another nameless worker. As he stepped into the elevator, he exhaled slowly. Step 1, complete. The basement level of Apex Dynamics was a world away from the sleek, glass-walled offices above. The lighting was harsher, the floors duller, and the air carried the scent of cleaning chemicals and industrial storage. Following the signs to janitorial services, Ethan soon found himself standing outside a cramped office with a faded sign that read Rosa Martinez, supervisor. He knocked tentatively. "Come in," a voice called. Pushing the door open, Ethan found himself facing a middle-aged woman with short, graying hair tied back in a bun. She wore a no-nonsense expression and a uniform similar to his, though hers bore years of wear and tear. "You must be the new guy," she said, eyeing him up and down. "Yes, Eli Dawson," Ethan said, forcing a slight nervousness into his voice. Rosa snorted. "No need for them nonsense. It's Rosa." She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "Sit." Ethan obeyed. Rosa reached for a clipboard, flipping through a set of printed papers. "Says here you were a handyman before this." He nodded. Olivia had carefully crafted his backstory, a former maintenance worker who had been struggling to find stable employment after moving to the city. Rosa gave him another scrutinizing look. "Ever done janitorial work before?" "Not officially, but I've done a lot of cleaning in my day," Ethan said, keeping his voice steady. "Uh-huh." Rosa scribbled something on the clipboard. "Look, this ain't rocket science, but it ain't easy either. You show up, you work hard, and you don't cause problems, we'll get along fine." "Understood." "Yes, yes, Rosa." She nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Follow me." Ethan trailed Rosa through the maze of maintenance corridors, absorbing everything around him. The janitorial office, a cramped space filled with cleaning supplies and a rickety coffee machine, was a far cry from the executive lounges upstairs. The break room consisted of a few metal folding chairs and a vending machine with questionable snack choices. "This is where you clock in and out," Rosa said, pointing to an old punch card machine. "You got the overnight shift this week. You'll be cleaning the main offices, break rooms, and conference areas. Got it?" "Got it." She handed him a mop and bucket. "All right, let's see what you're made of. Start with the lobby. Work your way up." Ethan took the handle of the mop, the reality of the situation settling over him. A week ago, he was running a billion-dollar company from the top floor. Now, he was pushing a janitor's cart toward the gleaming lobby of Apex Dynamics. The moment he stepped into the main office area, the change in atmosphere was immediate. The lobby, with its marble floors and massive Apex Dynamics logo, was bustling with employees arriving for the day. Ethan stood off to the side, bucket in hand, watching the scene unfold. No one noticed him. Not the executives walking in with their designer briefcases. Not the middle managers chatting about upcoming deadlines. Not the young interns hurrying in with coffee cups in hand. He was invisible. A woman in a tailored blazer brushed past him without so much as a glance. "There's a spill near the elevator," she said over her shoulder. "Take care of it." Ethan stared after her, momentarily taken aback. Then he reminded himself, this was why he was here. Gripping the mop, he moved toward the elevator. As he worked, he listened. The conversations around him painted a picture of Apex dynamics that was different from the one he had believed in. Only the Ivy League kids get the good assignments. Haven't seen my boss in months. He only shows up for quarterly meetings. Don't bother going to HR. It's all politics. Ethan frowned. He had expected to hear some dissatisfaction, but the sheer volume of complaints was staggering. He straightened, looking around at the employees passing by, their words still echoing in his mind. Something was very wrong here. And he was about to find out just how deep the problem ran. Ethan maneuvered the heavy janitor's cart through the polished hallways of Apex Dynamics, the sound of its squeaky wheels barely audible over the morning buzz of employees filing into the building. The scent of fresh coffee and expensive cologne lingered in the air as executives and team leads strode past, their conversations filled with jargon about quarterly projections, client acquisitions, and upcoming product launches. Not a single person acknowledged him. The anonymity should have felt freeing, but instead, it gnawed at him. For years, he had prided himself on fostering a company culture where every employee felt valued. Yet, here he was, walking through his own building, and it was as if he didn't exist. "Hey, janitor." Ethan turned to see a young woman in a crisp blue blazer pointing at a small coffee spill near the reception desk. She barely looked at him as she continued typing on her phone. "Can you take care of that?" she said without waiting for an answer, already walking away. Ethan clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay in character. "Of course," he muttered. The receptionist, a young man with thick-framed glasses, gave him a sympathetic glance. "They don't mean to be rude," he offered. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Don't they?" The receptionist chuckled awkwardly and returned to his work, clearly not wanting to get involved. Ethan dipped his mop into the bucket, pressing the soapy strands against the spill and wiping it clean with practiced ease. It was a simple task, one that required little thought, but as he worked, he listened. Conversations flowed around him, snippets of dialogue slipping through the cracks of professionalism. "If she gets that promotion, I swear I'm quitting. She only got the project because she's friends with Damien. I haven't taken a real lunch break in weeks. If I step away, I'll fall behind, and you know how that goes. HR won't do anything. They just side with management." Ethan's grip tightened on the mop handle. So far, everything he had overheard confirmed the dissatisfaction outlined in the employee surveys. But hearing it firsthand, uncensored and raw, was different. This wasn't just discontent. It was exhaustion, frustration, disillusionment. He straightened, pushing his cart toward the next area of his assignment. His goal for the day was to clean the break rooms, common spaces, and hallways leading to the conference rooms. It was the perfect opportunity to observe the interactions between employees at every level of the company. His next stop was the employee break room, a space meant to offer respite from the day's work. But as Ethan stepped inside, he noticed something unsettling. The room was nearly empty. A handful of employees sat at the tables, but none were talking. A woman in her late 20s, still wearing her headset, shoveled food into her mouth while glancing at her laptop. Another man sat with a sandwich in one hand and his phone in the other, scrolling through emails. A third worker, a young intern, judging by his badge, hovered near the coffee machine, looking visibly nervous as he tapped out a message on his phone. No laughter. No conversations. No sign of camaraderie. This was supposed to be a break room, yet no one seemed to be taking a real break. Ethan took a slow breath, setting his mop aside and focusing on his cleaning tasks. As he wiped down the counters, he listened. "I heard the finance team had another all-nighter," one employee whispered to another. "They always do. Ever since Ava got passed over for that promotion, she's been doing twice the work just to stay in the running." Ethan stilled. Ava. He recognized the name from Olivia's reports, an incredibly talented senior accountant who had been at the company for years. "She should have gotten it," the other person muttered. "Instead, they gave it to that guy, what's his name, Travis? Just because he fits the company image better." Ethan's jaw tightened. Ava had been working herself to exhaustion, yet someone less experienced had been promoted over her? Based on image? He gritted his teeth and continued his work. Moments later, the break room door swung open, and a trio of young employees in expensive business attire strolled in. Their presence immediately shifted the energy of the room. "You see the client roster update," one of them said, grabbing a coffee pod from the machine. They put Raj on the presentations again. His colleague groaned. Ugh, that's going to be a disaster. Clients can barely understand him. Ethan turned slightly, watching out of the corner of his eye. Seriously, the first guy continued, lowering his voice to a mock whisper. I know he's good at what he does, but public speaking? Not his thing. The woman in their group smirked. It's not just that. Have you seen his clothes? I swear he dresses like it's still 2005. The three of them laughed. Ethan's hands tightened around the rag he was holding. He glanced at the young intern by the coffee machine. The kid looked uncomfortable, shifting awkwardly as he poured himself a cup of coffee. He clearly heard the entire exchange but said nothing. And neither did anyone else. Ethan exhaled sharply, forcing himself to focus. He wanted nothing more than to step in and put these people in their place. But he had to stay undercover. He had to learn more. The three employees left the room, still laughing. The intern sighed and looked toward Ethan for a brief second before quickly averting his gaze. He picked up his coffee and hurried out, head down. Ethan shook his head. So this is how it is, huh? As he continued his rounds, he saw more examples of the subtle but damaging culture that had taken root in his company. In some departments, employees huddled in tight-knit groups, leaving others out of conversations. In the executive lounge, managers spoke about team members as if they were statistics, not people. And then there were employees like Ava, working tirelessly, only to be passed over in favor of those who fit the mold of what management expected. The realization sat like a stone in Ethan's stomach. This wasn't just a handful of employees having a rough time. This was systemic. By the time he returned to the janitorial office, Rosa was waiting for him, arms crossed. How's the first day treating you, Dawson? She asked. Ethan set down his supplies, rolling his shoulders. It's been eye-opening. Rosa let out a short laugh. Yeah? You realizing yet that no one sees us? Ethan looked at her, the weight of the day settling in his chest. Yeah, he admitted. I think I am. Rosa gave him a knowing nod. Welcome to the bottom of the ladder, kid. Ethan didn't respond. Because in that moment, he wasn't just seeing the bottom of the company. He was seeing everything that had gone wrong at the top. And he wasn't sure he liked what he found. Ethan arrived at Apex Dynamics for his second day as Eli Dawson, stepping into the building through the employee entrance once again. The novelty of the disguise had worn off, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Yesterday had been enough to show him that something was deeply wrong with his company's culture. Today, he was determined to go deeper. As he clocked in at the janitorial office, Rosa glanced up from her clipboard. Surprised to see you back. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Why's that? Rosa chuckled dryly. Most new hires in janitorial don't last the week. Some don't last the day. Ethan smirked. Well, I guess I'm tougher than I look. She studied him for a moment before nodding. Good. Then grab a cart and head to the executive floor. They always want things spotless up there. Ethan's stomach twisted. He had spent years working on the executive floor, just not as a janitor. This time, he'd be looking at it from the perspective of the people who kept it running behind the scenes. As he stepped off the elevator onto the top floor, he was immediately hit with the familiar scent of expensive cologne, fresh coffee, and polished mahogany. Everything about the space exuded luxury, the high ceilings, the modern artwork, the glass-walled conference rooms. The contrast between this floor and the employee break room he had visited the day before was staggering. He pushed his cart toward the conference rooms, where a morning meeting was wrapping up. Through the glass, he could see a group of executives, including Damian Carter, his COO, engaged in conversation. We need to tighten the performance evaluations, Damian was saying. We can't afford to carry dead weight. If they're not producing results, they're replaceable. Ethan's stomach twisted. Another executive, Felicia Dunn, leaned forward. Agreed. And let's be real, some of these people aren't cut out for the company's future. We need the right kind of talent. Ethan clenched his jaw. The right kind of talent? What the hell does that mean? The conversation moved to revenue projections, and Ethan forced himself to keep mopping. He couldn't react. Not yet. Moments later, the conference room door swung open, and the executives spilled out. Damian glanced in Ethan's direction but didn't recognize him. Janitor, Felicia said as she breezed past, her tone clipped. Make sure the windows are spotless. Clients don't want to see streaks. She didn't wait for a response. Ethan gritted his teeth and grabbed a rag, wiping down the already pristine windows. As he worked, he heard hushed voices from a nearby hallway. "Linda is impossible to work under," someone whispered. "I know," another voice replied. "But if you speak up, you're gone. She's got Damien backing her, and HR won't do anything." Ethan's hand stilled. HR won't do anything? This wasn't a one-time complaint. This was a pattern. For years, he had trusted his leadership team to uphold the company's values. Had they been feeding him a sanitized version of reality while letting toxicity fester? Ethan finished cleaning the conference room and moved toward the executive lounge, where high-level managers congregated. The space was a stark contrast to the employee break room, a sleek, private cafe with barista-made coffee, plush seating, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. As he wiped down the counters, he overheard snippets of conversation. "Customer service team keeps complaining about workload. I told them to toughen up. If they can't handle it, they can leave. We need to be careful with promotions. We don't want the wrong type of people representing Apex Dynamics. I swear, these employees act like they're entitled to handouts. No one wants to work hard anymore." Ethan's grip on his rag tightened. Every word he heard confirmed what he had suspected. There was an us versus them mentality within leadership. Executives and senior managers viewed lower-level employees as expendable, rather than the foundation of the company's success. And the worst part? Ethan had let this happen. He had been so focused on expansion, so busy making deals, that he had taken his leadership team at their word when they told him everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. It was broken. As he finished up in the executive lounge, he saw a young woman in a navy blue suit walking briskly down the hall, clutching a folder to her chest. Her face was tense, her steps hurried. Ava Johnson. Ethan recognized her from the employee files Olivia had given him. One of the company's brightest financial analysts. Passed over for a promotion in favor of someone less qualified. Ava turned a corner, heading toward the finance department. On instinct, Ethan followed at a distance. When he reached the finance wing, he found Ava at her desk, flipping through financial reports with furrowed brows. The stress on her face was evident. A group of employees stood near the water cooler, speaking in hushed voices. "I heard Ava's working overtime to clean up Travis's mess." "Of course she is. She should have gotten that promotion, and now she's doing the work anyway." Ethan felt a fresh wave of anger. He continued cleaning, lingering near Ava's desk. As he emptied a nearby trash bin, he saw her pinch the bridge of her nose, muttering under her breath. "This can't be right," she whispered, tapping at her calculator. Ethan watched as she scribbled down figures, her frown deepening. Then she reached for her phone and dialed a number. "Mrs. Lee," she said softly. "I know it's late, but I really need those numbers from last quarter." "Yes, I understand." "No, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent. Please, I'll owe you one." She hung up with a sigh, rubbing her temples. Ethan hesitated before speaking. "Rough night?" Ava looked up, startled, as if just now realizing he was standing there. She quickly composed herself. "Just a long day." Ethan kept his tone casual. "You work late often." She let out a short laugh. "More than I should. Does your boss know?" Ava's smile faded. "It doesn't matter. He got the job." "I didn't." Ethan nodded slowly. "But you're the one cleaning up after him." Her expression darkened, but she said nothing. Ethan didn't press. Instead, he gave her a small nod before returning to his work. But as he walked away, his mind raced. Ava wasn't just overworked, she was undervalued. She had the skills, the dedication, but not the recognition. How many others were in the same situation? As Ethan returned to the janitorial office at the end of his shift, Rosa glanced up from her desk. "How's it looking up there?" she asked. Ethan hesitated before answering. "Worse than I thought." Rosa snorted. "It usually is." Ethan exhaled. He had spent years building Apex Dynamics into an industry leader. But what good was success if the very people holding up the company were suffering? He wasn't just here to observe anymore. He was here to change everything. Ethan arrived at Apex Dynamics for his third day as Eli Dawson, stepping into the building with a sense of purpose that had not been there before. The first 2 days had been eye-opening, but now, the weight of what he had witnessed was settling into his bones. His company, the one he had poured his life into, was nothing like what he had believed it to be. He had seen overworked employees being ignored. He had watched talent wasted while favoritism reigned. He had overheard conversations from executives who treated people as disposable assets rather than human beings. And today, he was diving even deeper. He reported to the janitorial office as usual, where Rosa was waiting for him, her expression unreadable as she handed him his assignment for the day. Maintenance rooms, the main offices, and some of the conference spaces, she said. Lot of meetings happening today. You'll be seeing a lot of the higher-ups. Perfect, Ethan thought. He grabbed his cart and got to work, making his way through the lower floors first. The early morning crowd was already in full motion, engineers rushing to their workstations, customer service representatives settling in for their first calls, and analysts gathering in huddles. The office was a well-oiled machine, but now, Ethan could see the cracks forming beneath the surface. As he cleaned, he overheard a conversation between two junior employees near the elevator. "I swear, if I have to take on one more project, I'm going to lose it," one of them muttered. "I know," the other replied. "And they just expect us to deal with it. No raises, no recognition, just more work. I bet if we burned out tomorrow, they'd have replacements lined up in a week." Ethan's stomach twisted. He continued his rounds, eventually reaching the customer support department, an area he had barely spent time in as CEO. He paused outside a small break room, listening. "I told them we needed more staff," a woman was saying, frustration lacing her voice. "But nope. Budget cuts." Meanwhile, sales is hiring more account managers. Another employee scoffed. "Of course they are. They bring in the money. We just keep the clients from leaving." Laughter, but it wasn't the joyful kind. It was bitter, resigned. Ethan stepped inside, grabbing a cloth to wipe down the tables. The room fell silent. He had already learned that no one paid attention to the janitors, until they were close enough to overhear something. After a moment, the employees resumed talking. "I had a call yesterday where a guy was literally screaming at me for 15 minutes, the first woman said. 15 minutes. And you know what my manager said when I reported it?" Ethan could already guess. "Maybe you should work on your tone. Try sounding more empathetic next time." The woman's friend groaned. "Classic." Ethan exhaled slowly, resisting the urge to speak up. He had heard horror stories about how customer support teams were treated, both by clients and by management, but now he was seeing it up close. These people were the company's frontline, dealing with irate customers, solving issues, making sure Apex Dynamics kept its reputation. And they were being told to work on their tone. Ethan left the break room without a word, his hands tightening into fists. He had enough work to do in management, but this was something else. As the day wore on, Ethan made his way to the engineering department, where he had another task, cleaning the glass-walled conference rooms. Inside one, a group of managers were discussing upcoming projects. "We need the best people on this," one of them said. "What about Henry in IT?" another suggested. "Henry?" the first manager scoffed. "Come on. He's a nice guy, but he's not exactly leadership material." Ethan glanced inside. Henry, the kind IT technician who had been nothing but helpful since Ethan started, was being dismissed in real time. "Besides," another manager added, "I think we should bring in someone fresh. We don't need the old guard slowing us down." Ethan tightened his grip on the cleaning rag. Old guard? Henry wasn't even that old. He was an experienced, reliable, and well-liked employee. But here he was, being overlooked because he didn't fit some arbitrary leadership mold. Ethan turned away, continuing down the hall. Near one of the glass offices, he spotted Ava again, hunched over a set of financial reports. She looked even more exhausted than yesterday. A manager walked by her desk and dropped another file onto her growing pile. "Need you to look this over by end of day, Ava." She barely looked up. "I already have 3 reports to finish." "Yeah, well, this one's priority." He walked away without waiting for a response. Ethan watched as Ava ran a hand through her hair, exhaling sharply. It was the same pattern, over and over. Hard-working employees like Ava and Henry were pushed aside, overworked, and underappreciated. Meanwhile, people who fit the image of leadership were promoted, whether they deserved it or not. The worst part? Ethan had allowed this to happen. As CEO, he had been the one to sign off on these hires. He had trusted his management team to make the right calls. He had believed in a meritocratic system. But this wasn't meritocracy. It was favoritism, disguised as company culture. By the time Ethan reached the executive floor, his mind was a whirlwind of frustration. He started cleaning the lounge area, where a group of executives were laughing over coffee. "I swear, these younger employees just don't want to work," one of them was saying. Another chuckled. "Tell me about it. Back in my day, we didn't have mental health days and burnout prevention. You worked or you got replaced." Laughter. Ethan forced himself to keep scrubbing. One of the executives turned toward Damien, who was sipping his coffee with a smirk. "Anyway, we need to cut costs somewhere. Maybe trim down the support teams a bit?" Ethan's heart pounded. Damien shrugged. "I mean, if they're already complaining about being overworked, what's a little more pressure?" More laughter. Ethan felt a wave of nausea. These people weren't just out of touch, they were actively choosing to ignore the struggles of their employees. And he had trusted them. The realization settled in his gut like a rock. This wasn't growing pains. This wasn't the price of success. This was a broken system. And Ethan was done standing on the sidelines. As he finished his shift, he returned to the janitorial office, where Rosa was reviewing schedules. "How's the executive floor treating you?" she asked, her voice laced with sarcasm. Ethan hesitated before answering. "Like I don't exist," she snorted. "Welcome to the club." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something in her expression, something he had seen in Ava, in Henry, in the employees in customer support. Resignation. Because they knew. They had known for years. And they had given up on things ever changing. But Ethan wasn't about to give up. Not now. Not after seeing the truth. Tomorrow, he was going to push even further. And soon, everyone, especially his executive team, would know exactly what he had found. Ethan arrived at Apex Dynamics for his 4th day as Eli Dawson, slipping into the building through the employee entrance just as he had the past 3 days. But today, his mindset was different. The past few days had shattered every illusion he had about his company. He had seen the cracks in the foundation, the favoritism in promotions, the dismissiveness of management, and the overwhelming exhaustion that ran through the lower levels of the organization like a silent plague. Now, he wasn't just here to observe. He was here to understand. Rosa barely looked up from her desk when he entered the janitorial office. "Morning, Dawson. You're on IT and security today. Lots of techies and night shift guards to deal with." Ethan nodded, taking the schedule she handed him. IT and security. 2 departments he rarely interacted with as CEO. If he had learned anything in the past few days, it was that the further down the corporate ladder he went, the more invisible people became. He grabbed his cart and headed toward the IT department first, weaving through the rows of desks where technicians worked under the dim glow of their monitors. Unlike the more polished sections of the company, IT had a raw, cluttered energy to it, scattered coffee cups, whiteboards filled with half-sketched ideas, and cables running like veins across the floor. As he wiped down desks and emptied trash bins, he watched the team work. Unlike the executive floor, there was a sense of camaraderie here. They weren't rushing past each other with empty pleasantries, they were actively helping each other, bouncing ideas back and forth. One employee in particular caught Ethan's attention. Henry Richardson. Ethan had overheard a conversation about Henry the previous day, how he had been passed over for leadership roles because he wasn't exactly management material. He didn't seem to care about office politics or climbing the corporate ladder. He simply worked. Ethan watched as Henry moved between desks, assisting co-workers with debugging issues and patiently walking a junior employee through a particularly tricky piece of coding. The younger man sighed. "I don't get it. No matter what I do, I keep hitting the same roadblock." Henry clapped him on the shoulder. "You're overcomplicating it. Here, let me show you." Ethan had spent years leading one of the most powerful tech companies in the country, but watching Henry work made him realize something. This was leadership. Not titles. Not corporate jargon. Just showing up and helping others succeed. As Ethan scrubbed the corner of a desk, Henry suddenly turned to him. "Hey, could you hand me that cable over there?" For a second, Ethan hesitated. He saw me. Not as a CEO. Not as a janitor. But as a person in the room. Ethan picked up the cable and handed it over. "Thanks, man," Henry said with a nod before turning back to his work. Ethan watched him for another moment, then continued his rounds. Henry should have been promoted years ago. Underscore 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 underscore. By midday, Ethan had moved on to the security team stationed near the lower level corridors. Security was an afterthought in most companies. The guards were expected to blend into the background, there when you needed them, invisible when you didn't. As Ethan cleaned the break area for the security staff, he overheard two guards, Malcolm and Troy, talking. "You working another double shift?" Malcolm asked, shaking his head. Troy sighed. "Yeah. They're short-staffed again. We put in a request for another hire, but I guess budget cuts won't allow it." "Man, that's ridiculous. They just renovated the executive lounge, but they can't afford one more security officer." Troy scoffed. "Apparently not. So here I am, running on 4 hours of sleep." Ethan tightened his grip on the spray bottle he was holding. Apex Dynamics wasn't struggling. The company was making record profits. He had personally approved massive budgets for research and expansion. So why were the people responsible for keeping the company running, the IT staff, the security team, the janitorial workers, being overlooked and overworked? He turned his attention back to the two guards, who were now discussing an incident from the previous week. "A guy from the executive floor threw a fit because I didn't let him bring his unauthorized guest in after hours," Troy said, shaking his head. "Said I was just a security guard and that I should know my place." Malcolm sighed. "Let me guess, nothing happened to him." Troy let out a bitter laugh. "Of course not. Meanwhile, if I step out of line, I lose my job." Ethan felt his stomach twist. It was a pattern. Over and over. Those at the top were untouchable, while those at the bottom were disposable. He finished up his cleaning and pushed his cart out of the room, his mind racing. By the time his shift ended, Ethan had seen enough. He had walked through the invisible parts of his company. He had spoken to the unsung heroes, the people who kept the lights on, the systems running, and the company safe. And they were being ignored. Overworked. Underpaid. Undervalued. He needed to talk to Olivia Jong. After clocking out, he made his way to a secluded hallway near HR. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to Olivia. "We need to meet. Tonight. It's worse than we thought." A moment later, his phone buzzed. "Meet me at my place. 8 p.m. Ethan exhaled sharply. Tomorrow, he would go even deeper. But tonight, he needed to start planning. Because he wasn't just watching anymore. He was getting ready to fix this. Ethan sat across from Olivia Jong in her dimly lit apartment, the city skyline glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her. The tension in the room was thick as she scrolled through her tablet, reviewing notes he had sent her from the past few days. Her usual sharp, composed demeanor had given way to something closer to exhaustion. "This is bad," Olivia finally muttered, rubbing her temples. "Worse than I thought." Ethan leaned forward. "I had no idea it had gotten this bad." "And I should have?" Olivia exhaled sharply. "You trusted the reports, the numbers, the leadership team. And they fed you a polished version of reality." He nodded, running a hand through his beard. "The culture is completely different from what I thought we built. Employees are afraid to speak up. People like Henry in IT and Ava in finance, talented, hardworking employees, are being ignored. Security is underpaid and overworked, customer support is treated like garbage, and executives act like they're untouchable." Olivia glanced at him. "Are you starting to see why the employee surveys were so bad?" Ethan let out a dry laugh. "I am the survey now." She smirked, but it quickly faded. "So what's the plan? You're not just going to stay undercover forever." Ethan shook his head. "No. But I need more time. There's something deeper happening here. A culture like this doesn't form overnight. I need to figure out exactly where it started, and then we rip it out at the roots." Olivia sighed, setting her tablet down. "I'll do some digging from my end. But be careful, Ethan. You're playing a dangerous game. If Damien or Felicia catch wind of what you're doing..." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then I make sure they regret it." Underscore 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 underscore. The next morning, Ethan walked into Apex Dynamics with renewed purpose. He clocked in as Eli Dawson, grabbed his cart, and checked the day's assignment from Rosa. Conference rooms. Finance department. Engineering lab. Perfect. His first stop was finance, where he found Ava hunched over her desk, rubbing her temples as she stared at a massive spreadsheet. Her desk was buried in folders, reports, and sticky notes, and her coffee had long gone cold. Ethan grabbed a trash bin and casually moved near her, wiping down the area. "Rough morning?" he asked. Ava let out a short laugh. "Try rough year. Still picking up after your boss?" She blinked in surprise, looking at him properly for the first time. "What makes you say that?" Ethan shrugged, keeping his tone neutral. "Just an observation." Ava hesitated before sighing. "Yeah, I guess I am." She tapped her pen against her desk. "Travis doesn't know what he's doing. I mean, he's a nice enough guy, but he's in over his head. I've been fixing his mistakes for months. And no one even notices." Ethan felt a familiar pang of frustration. "That's gotta be frustrating." Ava scoffed. "You have no idea. Last year, I applied for the senior analyst position, thinking maybe, just maybe, hard work actually mattered. Turns out, all that mattered was that Travis fit the company image better." Ethan's stomach turned. Ava exhaled, rubbing her temples. "But hey, that's life, right? Work twice as hard for half the recognition." Ethan glanced around, making sure no one was watching. "So why stay?" She let out a breath, shaking her head. "Because I actually care about what I do. I like solving problems. I like making sure our financials are solid. And," she hesitated, "because I have a family to support. I don't have the luxury of walking away." Ethan absorbed her words, guilt pressing into his chest. He had built this company with the intention of rewarding talent. Instead, it had become a place where hard work meant nothing unless you played the right political games. And people like Ava were paying the price for it. Before he could say anything else, a voice cut through the air. "Ava, I need you in the conference room," Travis called from across the floor. She closed her eyes briefly, then grabbed her notebook. "Duty calls," she muttered before walking away. Ethan watched her go, a heavy weight settling in his gut. This isn't how it should be. By lunchtime, Ethan had moved on to the engineering lab. It was one of the most innovative spaces in the company, a sleek, open area with developers working on cutting-edge AI models and next-generation software. This was the heart of Apex Dynamics, the place where its products were born. And yet, something felt off. Ethan pushed his cart inside, pretending to focus on cleaning, but his ears were open. "They rejected my proposal," a woman at one of the workstations was saying, her frustration evident. "You're kidding," her colleague replied. "Your prototype was solid." Ethan turned slightly, recognizing the woman, Jada Moore, one of the most promising engineers in the department. He had seen her name pop up in reports, always attached to innovative ideas. "I know," Jada said, shaking her head. "But guess who got the green light instead?" "Mark." The other engineer groaned. "Let me guess, because he presents better." Jada let out a bitter laugh. "Bingo. Doesn't matter that his idea is outdated garbage. He's got the executive presence they love." Ethan's jaw clenched. Again. The same pattern. He had spent years pushing for Apex Dynamics to be a meritocracy, a place where the best ideas won, where talent and innovation were valued above all else. But that wasn't what had happened. Instead, politics ruled. The loudest voices won. The right people got ahead. And the actual innovators? They were ignored. Ethan continued cleaning, but his mind was spinning. This wasn't just a management issue. It was a culture issue. That evening, Ethan sat in his car in the company parking lot, staring at the Apex Dynamics logo on the building. Everything was wrong. He had built a company that was supposed to reward talent. Instead, it had become a place where hardworking employees were ignored, where executives abused their power, where connections mattered more than contributions. Ava should have been promoted. Henry should have been recognized. Jada's ideas should have been implemented. But they weren't. Because the system was broken. And Ethan had allowed it to happen. He pulled out his phone and texted Olivia. "We need to accelerate the plan. I need to go deeper." Her response was immediate. "How much deeper?" Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard before he typed. "I need to push them. I need to see just how bad it really gets." Because now, he wasn't just observing anymore. Now, he was getting ready to burn the whole system down and rebuild it from the ground up. Ethan arrived at Apex Dynamics for his 5th day as Eli Dawson, his mind sharper than ever. The past few days had revealed more about his company than he had learned in the last 5 years as CEO. He had uncovered an unspoken hierarchy, where power was hoarded, talent was ignored, and hard work often went unnoticed. But today, he was going to push further. He needed to see exactly how deep this culture ran. As he clocked in, Rosa looked up from her desk and gave him a knowing smirk. "You keep coming back. Either you're really desperate for work, or you're just stubborn." Ethan returned the smirk. "A little of both?" She handed him his assignment. Main office spaces, conference rooms, and executive lounge again. "Oh, and the finance department wants a deep clean." Ethan's stomach clenched. He had seen enough of the finance department to know something was off, and now he had an opportunity to see it up close. Perfect. By mid-morning, Ethan was cleaning a corridor near finance when he heard Ava's voice. "No, Travis, that's not correct," she was saying, frustration laced in her tone. "This discrepancy is going to cause massive reporting issues for next quarter. We have to fix it now." Ethan slowed his pace, pretending to mop the floor as he listened. Travis sighed, dismissing her with a wave. "Relax, Ava. The auditors won't even notice." Ethan glanced inside the office. Travis, who had been promoted over Ava, was leaning back in his chair, spinning a pen between his fingers, clearly unbothered. Ava, meanwhile, looked like she was one bad decision away from quitting. "I noticed," Ava said through gritted teeth. "And when the numbers don't match up, it's going to be my head on the line, not yours." Travis rolled his eyes. "You worry too much. Just do what I asked and let me handle the big picture stuff." Ethan clenched his fists. Ava was carrying this team, and yet she was being treated like an afterthought. Worse, she was being forced to clean up after a manager who had no idea what he was doing. As she stormed out of the office, Ethan made his move. "Rough morning?" he asked casually, stepping into her path. Ava sighed, running a hand through her hair. "You could say that." She hesitated, then looked at him. "You know, you ask a lot of questions for a janitor." Ethan smiled slightly. "And you work way too hard for someone who doesn't get any credit." Ava let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "Yeah, well, what else is new?" She started to walk away, then hesitated. "You ever get the feeling that no matter how hard you work, the people at the top have already made up their minds about you?" Ethan met her gaze. "Yeah, I do." Ava studied him for a moment before nodding. "Then you get it." She walked off, leaving Ethan standing there, his mind churning. Ava wasn't just overworked, she was stuck. And how many other employees were in the same position? By the afternoon, Ethan had moved on to cleaning one of the larger conference rooms, just in time for a closed-door leadership meeting. He knew he wasn't supposed to listen. But he had no intention of leaving. He kept his head down, moving quietly along the edges of the room, cleaning the windows as executives filed in, including Damian Carter and Felicia Dunn. "All right, let's get started," Damian said, adjusting his expensive watch. Ethan stayed in the background, listening carefully. "First order of business," Felicia began. "The employee engagement survey results. HR wants to implement some morale-boosting initiatives, but personally, I think it's unnecessary. Employees complain no matter what." Laughter rippled around the table. Ethan's jaw tightened. Damian smirked. "I agree. We've had record profits, expansion is going well, and turnover hasn't affected productivity. Honestly, I don't see a problem." Ethan clenched his fists. "Of course they don't see a problem." Felicia continued. "On another note, the finance team is behind schedule, again. Ava's been requesting more resources, but I don't think we need to waste money on additional staff. She can handle it." Ethan barely contained his rage. They were deliberately ignoring employee struggles. They were choosing to overwork people like Ava. They were laughing at the very concerns that were breaking the company apart. And then came the final blow. Damian leaned back in his chair. "I've been thinking about another round of strategic layoffs." We could cut a few positions in IT and customer support. Honestly, those departments could be leaner. Felicia nodded. Agreed. Security can take a hit too. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. These people weren't leaders. They were parasites. They weren't looking for ways to support their employees. They were finding ways to squeeze them even harder. Ethan had seen enough. That evening, he met Olivia at a quiet diner outside the city. "I'm done watching," he said the moment he sat down. Olivia gave him a wary look. "What happened?" Ethan recounted everything. The conversation in finance. The leadership meeting. The way Damien and Felicia had laughed at the struggles of their employees. Olivia shook her head. "This is worse than I thought." Ethan exhaled, rubbing his temples. "We have to expose this. But not just to the employees. To everyone." Olivia leaned forward. "What are you thinking?" Ethan's mind was racing. "A company-wide meeting. I'll announce major leadership changes. And then, I'll reveal the truth." Olivia's eyes widened. "You mean, I'll tell them everything?" Ethan confirmed. "That I went undercover. That I saw what's been happening firsthand. That this company isn't what I thought it was. And Damien?" "Felicia." Ethan's expression hardened. "They're done." For the first time in years, he knew exactly what needed to be done. And tomorrow, he was going to change everything. Ethan arrived at Apex Dynamics with a different mindset today. For the past week, he had been watching, listening, and learning, seeing his company from the ground up in ways he never had before. He had uncovered favoritism, witnessed overworked employees being ignored, and heard his own leadership team dismiss the very people who kept the company running. But today? Today was the day it all changed. He walked through the employee entrance one last time as Eli Dawson, the janitor. But before the day was over, everyone would know exactly who he really was. As he clocked in at the janitorial office, Rosa barely glanced up from her clipboard. "You again," she said with a smirk. "Didn't think you'd last this long." Ethan smiled. "Yeah, well, guess I'm full of surprises." Rosa studied him for a moment before nodding. "You're different from the others," she muttered. Ethan tilted his head. "How do you mean?" She shrugged. "Most people down here? They don't ask questions. They keep their heads down, do their jobs, and go home. You see things. You listen." Ethan's chest tightened. She had no idea just how much he had been listening. Before he could respond, a notification popped up on his phone. An all-staff meeting had been scheduled for noon. Right on time. Ethan had asked Olivia to set it up, no details, just a mandatory meeting for the entire company. Employees would come expecting another routine corporate update. But what they were about to witness would be anything but routine. 11:55 a.m. The company auditorium buzzed with conversation as employees from every department filtered in, taking their seats. Some whispered about what the meeting was about. Others checked their phones, expecting another dull corporate address. In the front row, Damien Carter and Felicia Dunn sat comfortably, exchanging small talk. Neither of them had any idea what was about to hit them. Ethan, still dressed in his janitor's uniform, stood backstage. His heart pounded in his chest, but his hands were steady. Olivia stood beside him, arms crossed. "Are you ready for this?" Ethan exhaled sharply. "I have to be." She nodded. "Then let's burn it all down." With that, she stepped out onto the stage, walking up to the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice carrying over the murmur of the crowd. "I know you're all wondering why you're here. You'll get your answers in just a moment. But first, let's welcome our CEO, Ethan Caldwell." A confused ripple moved through the crowd. Where was Ethan? Then, slowly, he walked out onto the stage, still wearing his janitor's uniform. Gasps filled the room. Employees exchanged bewildered looks, whispering among themselves. From the front row, Damien's face twisted in confusion. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. Felicia frowned, shifting in her seat. Ethan stepped up to the microphone. He took a moment to scan the crowd, locking eyes with some of the employees he had met over the past week: Ava, Henry, Rosa, the security guards, the customer support staff. Then, he spoke. "For the past 7 days," he said, his voice firm, "I haven't been Ethan Caldwell, CEO of Apex Dynamics." A hush fell over the room. "I've been Eli Dawson, the janitor." Shocked murmurs filled the space. Some employees sat up straighter, eyes widening in realization. Others gasped. Damien stiffened. "What is he doing?" he whispered harshly to Felicia. Felicia didn't answer, her face draining of color. Ethan continued. "I wanted to see this company the way you see it. I wanted to understand the struggles of the people who work here, not just the executives, not just the board members, but the people who keep this company alive." He paused, scanning the crowd. "And what I saw broke me." Silence. Ethan took a slow breath, then began listing everything he had witnessed. "I saw brilliant employees, like Ava in finance, being overworked while unqualified managers take credit for their work." Ava's eyes widened in shock. People turned to look at her as she shrank into her seat. "I saw talented people, like Henry in IT, being overlooked for promotions because they don't fit the corporate image." Henry sat completely still, his eyes locked on Ethan. "I saw security officers working double shifts with no extra support. I saw customer support staff being treated like they're disposable. And worst of all," he turned toward Damien and Felicia, "I sat in a meeting where some of the highest-ranking executives in this company laughed about cutting jobs while sipping their expensive coffee." Gasps. Damien's face went red. "This is ridiculous," he barked, standing up. "This is a..." Ethan cut him off. "Sit down." The authority in his voice sent a shiver through the room. Damien hesitated, glancing around, realizing that the entire company was now watching him. Slowly, he sank back into his chair, his jaw clenched tight. Ethan took another step forward. "This company has lost its way," he said, voice steady but full of fire. "And I take full responsibility for that. I trusted the wrong people. I let power-hungry leaders turn this company into something it was never meant to be. And I'm done letting it happen." Ava, Henry, Rosa, and dozens of other employees leaned in, hanging on every word. "Effective immediately, there will be changes. Real changes." He turned to Olivia, who stepped forward with a set of documents in her hands. "Felicia Dunn, you are fired." Felicia's breath caught in her throat. "You can't. You're done." Ethan's voice was firm, final. "The way you've treated employees is unacceptable. Security will escort you out." The room erupted in whispers. Felicia's face twisted in shock, but she had no choice but to stand. Security was already approaching. Then, Ethan turned to Damien. "And you?" Damien sneered. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I would." Ethan took a step closer. "I trusted you, Damien. I let you lead this company while I focused on expansion. And you repaid that trust by creating a culture of elitism and fear." Damien scoffed. "You need me. I know this company inside and out." Ethan's lips curled into a smirk. "Then you'll have no problem finding another job." Security moved forward. Damien looked ready to explode. "You're making a mistake, Ethan," he spat as he was escorted away. "You think you're a hero? You won't last a year without me." Ethan smiled. "I guess we'll see." As the doors closed behind them, Ethan turned back to the employees. There was silence. Then, slowly, applause. It started with Henry. Then Ava. Then the security team. Then, all at once, the entire room erupted in cheers. Ethan took a deep breath. The reckoning was over. The real work was about to begin. Ethan stood in the center of the Apex Dynamics auditorium, the echoes of applause still ringing in his ears. He had just torn down the power structure that had allowed corruption, favoritism, and neglect to fester in his company. But now came the hard part, building something better. As the applause died down, Ethan raised his hand for silence. "I know many of you are shocked by what just happened," he admitted. "I know some of you are wondering what comes next. I don't have all the answers yet, but here's what I do know: we are going to fix this." A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. Ethan turned his gaze to the employees who had been overlooked and mistreated, the security guards, the IT staff, the engineers, the customer service representatives, the janitorial workers. The people who had kept this company running while being treated like they didn't matter. That starts today. 2 hours later. Back in his office, his real office, Ethan sat across from Olivia Jong, who was reviewing the first wave of leadership restructuring. "So, Damien and Felicia are out," she said, tapping at her tablet. "But we need replacements. Strong ones." Ethan nodded. "And not the usual candidates. I want fresh leadership. People who actually understand the real work that happens here." Olivia gave him a knowing look. "You have some names in mind?" Ethan leaned back. "Yeah, I do. She crossed her arms. Let's hear them. Ethan exhaled. First, Ava Johnson for the senior finance analyst position. Olivia's eyebrows shot up. You're serious? She's already doing the job, Olivia. She's running that department without credit. That ends today. Olivia smirked. Done? Ethan continued. Henry Richardson for head of IT. Olivia grinned. I like it. He's been passed over for years, and it's about damn time he got what he deserved. Agreed. Who else? Ethan leaned forward. Jada Moore for the engineering leadership team. Her ideas are getting rejected, and I guarantee you if we put her in charge, that department will thrive. Olivia nodded. I'll make it happen. Ethan hesitated for a moment. Then, he added, and Rosa. Olivia blinked. Janitor Rosa. She's been here longer than most executives, Ethan said firmly. She understands what happens at every level of this company. I want her overseeing workplace culture and employee experience. Olivia let out a surprised laugh. I have to admit, I didn't see that one coming. Ethan smiled. Neither did she. Later that day, Ava sat in the finance office, her hands still trembling from the meeting she had just walked out of. She had come into work expecting another day of being ignored and overworked. Instead, she had walked out with a promotion and a personal apology from Ethan Caldwell himself. Her co-workers surrounded her, some congratulating her, others still too stunned to process what had happened. You earned this, one of them said. You should have gotten this a long time ago. Ava exhaled, running a hand through her hair. I don't even know what to say. Henry, across the building in IT, had a similar reaction when he was informed of his new leadership role. Wait, he had said to Olivia when she delivered the news. Are you serious? Very, Olivia replied. Welcome to the leadership team, Henry. Henry stared at his co-workers, who were already cheering. This is insane, he muttered. Yeah, Olivia said, smirking. But it's about time. That evening, Ethan stood on the rooftop of Apex Dynamics, staring out at the city skyline. For years, he had seen himself as a successful CEO, building something great. Now, he realized he had been blind. The people who made Apex Dynamics great had been ignored for far too long. And if he had never gone undercover as a janitor, he might have never seen it. Lisa joined him, slipping an arm around his waist. So, she said softly. How does it feel? Ethan exhaled. Like I just burned everything to the ground. She smirked. And now, he said, a small smile tugging at his lips, I get to rebuild it the right way. Lisa squeezed his hand. I think you already started. Ethan glanced back at the illuminated Apex Dynamics logo behind him, knowing that from this day forward, everything would be different. This wasn't just about cleaning house. This was about building something better. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan was ready. Ethan arrived at Apex Dynamics the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. The weight that had settled on his shoulders over the past week had lifted, not completely, but enough to let him breathe. The toxic leadership had been removed, and employees like Ava, Henry, and Jada had finally been given the recognition they deserved. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. As he stepped into his office, Olivia was already waiting, a tablet in her hands. You didn't waste any time, she said, smirking. Ethan chuckled, settling into his chair. Neither did you. She handed him the device. Here's what we've done so far. Leadership restructuring is in motion. Henry and Ava have already taken over their departments, and Jada is getting started on a full product overhaul. Ethan nodded, scrolling through the reports. And Rosa? Olivia grinned. She almost refused the promotion. Ethan laughed. Of course she did. But, Olivia continued, she finally accepted, on the condition that she still gets to drink her coffee in the janitor's lounge. Ethan shook his head, amused. She can do whatever she wants. Good, Olivia said. Because she's already making changes. She started gathering real employee feedback, the unfiltered kind. She's not just fixing the culture. She's rebuilding it from the ground up. Ethan exhaled, a deep satisfaction settling in his chest. That's exactly what we need. Midday, Ethan took a walk. For years, his presence in the office had been announced by secretaries and scheduled on calendars. Today, he simply walked. He started in IT, where Henry was already working with his new team. We need better collaboration across departments, Henry was saying as Ethan entered. If we're going to innovate, we can't keep working in silos. Ethan smiled. Henry was already stepping into his leadership role. When Henry spotted him, he grinned. "Boss," he greeted. Ethan shook his head. "Just Ethan." Henry smirked. "Still getting used to that." Ethan leaned against a desk. "How's the transition?" Henry exhaled. "Not gonna lie, it's a lot. But it's good. I feel like I can actually make a difference now." "You will," Ethan said. "And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." Henry nodded, the weight of being seen finally sinking in. One step closer. Later that afternoon, Ethan visited Ava. She was standing at a whiteboard, running calculations, surrounded by a team of analysts who were hanging on to her every word. She was thriving. "And that's why we need to overhaul the budget structure," Ava was saying. "We've been cutting costs in the wrong places, and it's been affecting long-term stability. That changes now." Ethan felt a surge of pride. Ava had spent years working behind the scenes, doing everyone else's job while being ignored. Now, she was leading. When she spotted him, she crossed her arms. "You know, I still can't believe this is real." Ethan chuckled. "Believe it?" She studied him. "What made you do it?" "The whole janitor thing." Ethan exhaled. "I wanted the truth." Ava nodded slowly. "Well, you got it. And now?" Ethan asked. Ava smirked. "Now, we fix it." Another step forward. By the end of the day, Ethan stood on the rooftop again, staring out at the city. Lisa joined him, slipping her arms around his waist. "How was today?" Ethan let out a deep breath. "Hopeful." She smiled. "That's a change." Ethan nodded, his gaze still fixed on the skyline. For years, he had believed he was building something great. But he had been blind to the people who had built it with him. Now, he saw them. Now, he was listening. And now? He was leading. Not from behind a desk. Not from an executive floor. But from within. And this time, he was getting it right. Ethan arrived at Apex Dynamics the next morning to an entirely different atmosphere. For years, employees had walked into this building with a mix of quiet resignation and exhaustion. Today, though, there was a buzz in the air. People talked in the hallways. There was laughter in the break rooms. Even the energy felt different. Change had begun. As he stepped onto the main floor, employees saw him, not as the distant CEO they had once feared, but as the man who had walked in their shoes. Some nodded in respect. Some smiled. Some even walked up to him. "Thank you," a customer service rep said as he passed. "For actually seeing us." Ethan nodded, his chest tightening. "It's overdue." He knew this wasn't instant success. One meeting didn't fix years of broken culture. But it had started something real. And now, it was time to build on it. By mid-morning, Ethan called a leadership meeting. The room felt different without Damien and Felicia sitting at the table. Instead, new faces, Henry, Ava, Jada, Rosa, had taken their places. Ethan leaned forward. "All right. Let's talk about what's next." Ava was the first to speak. "We need to change the way we evaluate promotions. No more rewarding people for playing office politics." Henry nodded. "We also need a real leadership development program. People like Ava shouldn't have to wait years for a chance to lead." Jada crossed her arms. "And innovation. If we want to stay competitive, we have to stop shutting down fresh ideas." Ethan listened. This is what leadership should be. Not just one person dictating direction, but a team, collaborating. When Rosa finally spoke, her voice was steady. "We need to fix the culture." The room fell silent. "Policies are good," she continued, "but what about the way people treat each other?" The executives laughed at employees struggling to pay rent. Managers ignored their staff. "If we don't fix the mindset, everything else is just a band-aid." Ethan met her gaze. "So what do you propose?" She exhaled. "Mandatory empathy training. Leadership rotations, so managers actually understand the jobs they oversee. And most importantly, we need to listen to employees. Regularly. Not just when things are broken." The table nodded in agreement. Ethan smiled. This was what real progress looked like. "All right," he said. "Let's get to work." By late afternoon, word had spread. In the cafeteria, employees huddled in groups, talking about the changes. "You heard about the leadership program?" one employee asked. "They're actually going to train people for promotions now." I heard they're increasing security staff, another added. No more double shifts. This is unreal, someone muttered. Is this actually happening? Ethan stood at a distance, watching. These weren't just policy changes. These were people's lives. And for the first time in years, they had hope. That evening, Ethan sat in his office, reviewing final plans with Olivia. She glanced up at him. So, you actually did it? Ethan smirked. We did it. She studied him for a moment, then leaned back. It still feels surreal. It should, he admitted. But it's real. And it's just the beginning. Olivia chuckled. Well, if you ever get the urge to go undercover again, let me know. Ethan laughed. Trust me, once was enough. But deep down, he knew he would never stop listening again. He had walked in their shoes. And he would never forget it. Late that night, Lisa found Ethan sitting on the porch, lost in thought. She handed him a cup of tea and sat beside him. You're quiet. Ethan exhaled. Just thinking. Lisa smiled knowingly. About what? About how close I came to missing all of this, he admitted. If I had never gone undercover, I don't think I ever would have seen it. Lisa nodded. And now? Ethan took a deep breath. Now, I know what kind of leader I need to be. Lisa squeezed his hand. And what kind is that? Ethan smiled softly. One who listens. One who sees. One who leads from within. And as he looked out at the city skyline, he realized something. For the first time in years, he wasn't just running a company. He was building a legacy. The next morning, Ethan walked through the halls of Apex Dynamics, not as the unseen janitor, not as the distant CEO, but as a leader with purpose. It had only been a day since he had removed Damien and Felicia from their positions. But already, the culture was shifting. People walked differently. They held their heads higher. There was a new energy in the building, one that wasn't just about work, but about belonging. This was just the start. As Ethan entered the executive conference room, his new leadership team was already waiting. Ava, Henry, Jada, Rosa. For employees who had been overlooked for years. For people who now had the power to change everything. He took his seat at the head of the table, but it didn't feel like his seat anymore. It belonged to all of them. All right, Ethan said. Let's talk about the future. Over the next few weeks, real changes began to take shape. Ava restructured the finance department, implementing a performance-based review system that eliminated favoritism. No more promotions based on politics, she said. We reward talent. Period. Henry redesigned IT policies, increasing communication across departments. He introduced a mentorship program for junior employees, because no one should be left figuring things out alone. Jada created an innovation committee, giving engineers, designers, and employees at all levels a space to pitch ideas directly to leadership. No more great concepts getting buried under bureaucracy. Rosa led the most radical shift of all. She implemented mandatory empathy training for managers. She created an open-door policy where employees could safely report concerns without fear of retaliation. And most importantly, she started regular leadership rotations. Every quarter, managers would spend a week working in the departments they oversaw. That meant marketing executives had to sit with customer support. Finance heads had to shadow analysts. And no one, no matter how high their position, was above doing the work. It was a shock to some. But for the employees who had been ignored for years, it was justice. 1 month later, Ethan stood in the cafeteria, drinking coffee and watching the ripple effect unfold. The security team was fully staffed, no more double shifts. Customer support had more resources, and the employees actually looked happy. Ava was laughing with her team, not buried under work for someone else. Henry was collaborating with engineers on a tech overhaul. And Jada? She was leading a team discussion on a brand new AI initiative that had already caught the attention of investors. For the first time in a long time, Apex Dynamics wasn't just growing. It was thriving. And the best part? It was because of the people who had been invisible before. Ethan felt a presence next to him and turned to see Rosa, coffee in hand. She smirked. Not bad, boss. Ethan chuckled. Not bad at all. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the company they had rebuilt together. Then, Rosa glanced at him. So, you ever thinking of going undercover again? Ethan laughed. Not unless you make me. Rosa raised an eyebrow. I just might. He grinned, shaking his head. You'd be the only one who could. Later that night, Ethan sat on the rooftop, watching the city lights. Lisa found him there, as she always did, curling up beside him. "How does it feel?" she asked softly. Ethan took a deep breath. "It feels right," she smiled. "You did it, you know." Ethan shook his head. "We did it." Lisa squeezed his hand. For years, Ethan had thought power came from the top. But he had been wrong. True leadership wasn't about titles. It wasn't about suits or boardrooms. It was about people. About listening. About serving. And now? He wasn't just leading a company. He was leading a movement. And this was only the beginning. Ethan stood in the Apex Dynamics auditorium, looking out at the employees who had built this company from the ground up. A month ago, this room had been filled with tension, with whispers of doubt, with people who had spent years feeling overlooked, ignored, or expendable. Today, there was pride in their eyes, confidence in their voices, hope in the air. And for the first time, Ethan wasn't speaking to them. He was speaking with them. He stepped up to the microphone, letting the energy of the room settle. 1 month ago, he began, "I stood on this stage and told you the truth. That I had spent a week as a janitor in this company. That I had seen things I had been blind to for years." A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. "I told you that we were going to change. That we were going to fix what was broken. That we were going to build something better." He paused, letting his gaze move across the room, seeing Henry in IT, Ava in finance, Jada in engineering, Rosa in workplace culture, and so many others whose voices were finally being heard. "And we did," he said. Applause. Not polite. Not forced. But real. Ethan smiled. "But this isn't the finish line. This is just the first step." He glanced at Rosa, who gave him a small nod. "We're continuing leadership rotations. Because no manager should make decisions without understanding the work their employees do." Ava crossed her arms, smirking. "We're continuing fair promotions. No more playing office politics. If you work hard, you get recognized." Henry grinned. "We're keeping our innovation committee. Because the best ideas don't just come from the top. They come from everywhere." Jada gave him a thumbs up. And most importantly, Ethan's voice softened. "We're never going back to the way things were." Silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The powerful kind. Then, someone in the crowd started clapping. Then another. Then another. And suddenly, the entire room was standing, cheering, not just for Ethan, but for themselves. For the company they had rebuilt. For the future they were shaping together. Ethan let the applause wash over him, not as a victory, but as a promise. A promise that this company would never forget the people who built it. Later that evening, Ethan stood in his office, watching the city skyline. Lisa walked in, carrying 2 cups of tea. "Big day," she said. Ethan exhaled, taking the cup she handed him. "Yeah, it was." Lisa studied him. "You okay?" Ethan turned to her, his expression softer. "For the first time in a long time, yeah." Lisa smiled, stepping closer. "You did what most CEOs never do. You listened. You changed." Ethan chuckled. "I had a hell of a team helping me." Lisa leaned in, kissing him softly. "And now?" Ethan gazed out the window. Now, Apex Dynamics wasn't just his company. It belonged to everyone who worked here. To everyone who had been unseen. To everyone who had ever thought their voice didn't matter. Because now, it did. And Ethan Caldwell? He wasn't just leading a company anymore. He was leading a legacy. A legacy built on truth. A legacy built on change. A legacy built on people. And for the first time, he knew it would last.